She tried to get him kicked off the plane until he pulled out something that changed everything. It was 6:22 a.m. when the sun finally cracked over the edges of the runway at Phoenix Sky Harbor. The terminal was already alive with the usual morning shuffle, rolling suitcases, tired travelers clutching oversized coffees, kids dragging their feet behind parents who looked like they hadn't slept in 2 days. In the middle of it all stood Emery Tillman, tall, clean-cut, early 40s, dark brown skin, trimmed beard. He didn't move like he was in a rush. He had that presence, calm, calculated, like he was always 5 steps ahead of everyone else, but never needed to prove it. He adjusted the strap on his duffel, then handed his boarding pass to the gate agent without a word. "Morning, Mr. Tillman," the agent smiled politely, scanning the code. "You're all set. Enjoy the flight." He nodded once, not cold, just efficient, and walked toward the jet bridge. He didn't have earbuds in yet, just observed. 3 teenagers took selfies by the window. An older couple argued softly about whether or not they'd remembered to lock the back door. Behind them, a woman in a pink floral blouse whispered rapidly into her phone. Emery clocked it all, automatically, without effort. It wasn't paranoia. It was training. But this wasn't work. This was supposed to be the off switch. He'd wrapped up a federal surveillance op in Tempe less than 18 hours ago. No headlines, no action movie drama, just weeks of silent, steady progress. Wiretaps, stakeouts, court orders. The kind of work people never thank you for, but that keeps everything from falling apart. He stepped onto the plane and gave a quick glance at the overhead bins. Row 14, window seat. Plenty of space for his briefcase. Perfect. As he settled into his seat, he finally pulled out his noise-canceling headphones, exhaled once, and let the low-engine hum take over. "Excuse me," a voice interrupted just as he was getting comfortable. A white woman in her mid-50s stood in the aisle, hesitant. Blonde highlights, too much perfume, clutching a designer tote with both hands. "I think you're in my seat." Emery looked up, confused for half a second, then checked his boarding pass. "No, ma'am," he said calmly, showing it to her. 14A window. She glanced at her own, then her face stiffened. "Oh," she muttered. "I'm 14B." He slid back in his seat and nodded toward the middle spot. She forced a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, then eased herself in. He turned his head toward the window, adjusting his seatbelt. They hadn't even left the gate yet, but something about the air had changed. But the real turbulence hadn't started yet, not even close. Emery could feel it before he could name it. Not tension exactly, more like a shift, like when someone turns the heat up in a room just enough for you to notice. The woman next to him was stiff, not rude, just off. She kept clutching her tote bag like it had something fragile inside. Every few seconds, she'd glance over at him, then snap her head back to stare straight ahead. He ignored it. He'd dealt with worse, on the job, in the courtroom, in restaurants. Most days, it slid right off him like water. Most days, he didn't have time to care. He powered down his phone and closed his eyes. "Excuse me," she said suddenly, tapping the armrest. "Would you mind?" She didn't finish the sentence, just gestured vaguely toward his briefcase under the seat. He frowned. "Is it in your way?" "No," she said quickly, "just never mind." She gave him a tight smile. He didn't return it. Across the aisle, a younger black man in a hoodie caught the whole thing. His name was Trayvon, mid-20s, student at Northern Arizona University, heading home for his cousin's wedding. He raised his eyebrows at Emery like, "You good, bro?" Emery gave a short nod. It was nothing. The pilot came over the speaker, welcoming everyone on board, giving the usual spiel about weather, cruising altitude, arrival time in St. Louis. As the flight attendants began their safety demo, Emery noticed his seatmate's hand trembling slightly as she fastened her seatbelt. He saw her glance back toward the rear of the plane, then forward toward the cockpit. She shifted uncomfortably in her seat. He thought she might be a nervous flyer, but then she did something else. She reached for the call button. "Hi there," she whispered as a young flight attendant leaned in. I don't want to be a bother, but could I possibly be reseated?" The attendant blinked. "Is something wrong with your seat, ma'am?" The woman leaned closer, her voice low but urgent. "I'm not saying anything's wrong. I don't feel entirely safe sitting here. This man," she gestured ever so slightly toward Emery, "he's been acting strangely." Emery didn't react, didn't turn his head, just stared out the window like he hadn't heard a thing, but inside, his stomach clenched. The flight attendant looked surprised. He hasn't done anything though, right? No, the woman said quickly, but something's just off. I'm a mother. I trust my gut. The attendant shifted her weight. Let me talk to the lead. The woman nodded, lips pressed tight. Emery finally turned his head, looked right at her. His voice was quiet. You should be careful what you imply, ma'am. She jumped slightly. I didn't mean anything. I just want to be comfortable on my flight. He didn't respond. Didn't have to. But the flight attendant came back with someone else, and that's when things started to twist. The new person walking down the aisle had authority written all over her posture. Flight service manager, late 30s, curly brown hair pulled into a bun, no-nonsense expression. Her name tag read Callie. Her eyes scanned the row before she even reached them. Good morning, she said with professional calm. I understand there's been a concern? The woman in 14B perked up. Yes, I just don't feel comfortable where I'm seated. I know it's last minute, but I thought maybe, just for safety, you might have another option available. Callie's eyes narrowed subtly. She'd heard versions of this before. Is the seat broken? No, she admitted, lowering her voice. It's not that. It's the passenger next to me. I think he might be hiding something. Callie turned her gaze to Emery. He was still seated, still calm, still quiet, but his eyes met hers with something sharper than annoyance. Not anger, more like calculation. Like he'd already figured out how this would go and was just waiting for the rest of the room to catch up. Callie took a breath. Sir, would you mind verifying your boarding pass? He didn't blink. Sure. He reached into his pocket, pulled it out, handed it over. She scanned it. 14A, no issue. The woman in 14B crossed her arms. I didn't say there was a seat issue. I just think we should be cautious. You never know who might be trying to get past security. He hasn't said a word since I sat down. Not one word. That's not a crime, Emery replied dryly. I didn't say it was, she snapped, flustered. Callie's professional mask cracked just a bit. Ma'am, I do need something specific in order to reassign seats, especially in priority. Has this passenger threatened you in any way? The woman looked around, noticing now that nearby passengers were watching. A teenager in row 15 paused his music. A woman across the aisle angled her head, listening. No, but he's got this case under the seat, and he won't say what's inside. And when I asked if he could move it, he was cold and silent. You can't tell me that's not suspicious. Callie turned to Emery. What's in the case, sir? Work documents, he said plainly. Private. Can I take a quick look inside? He held her gaze. Are you asking as TSA? Callie hesitated. No, sir, just as flight crew ensuring comfort. He nodded, slow and calm. Then no. The woman scoffed, exasperated. There, you see? He's hiding something. I knew it. Something's not right here. Now, a man in 13C turned around. Lady, you asked the man to move a briefcase. Now you're accusing him of... What exactly? I'm not accusing anyone, she shot back. I just want to be safe. You're just assuming something based on what? Your nerves? The man said. The woman blinked, caught off guard. I think I'd like to speak to the captain, she said finally, more forceful now. If something happens midair and I didn't say anything, I wouldn't forgive myself. Emery shifted slightly in his seat. Then finally, he spoke again. Is there a supervisor or air marshal on board? Because this is escalating fast over absolutely nothing. Callie looked torn. I'll call ground, she said finally. Captain will be informed. We're still at the gate. She disappeared toward the front. The woman leaned back, arms crossed again. Some people get really defensive when you ask simple questions, she muttered. Emery looked away, jaw tight. He didn't want to talk. Not now. Not until someone with actual jurisdiction arrived. But what she didn't know, and what everyone was about to find out, would shut the whole cabin up. It took less than 5 minutes. The delay had caught the captain's attention, and now a uniformed airline supervisor boarded through the front cabin. His badge read J. Bernard. Broad shoulders, salt and pepper goatee, clipboard in hand, walking with a sense of finality, like he didn't want to be here. But if he had to deal with it, he'd handle it quickly. He was followed closely by a Phoenix PD officer. Not TSA, not federal, just local. Standard protocol when passengers cause pre-flight disturbances. The supervisor stopped at row 14 scanning the passengers. "Who made the report?" he asked flatly. "I did," said the woman in 14B, raising her hand with too much urgency. "I didn't want to escalate things, but I genuinely don't feel safe. I'm not saying he's done anything wrong, but he's acting off, and he's being evasive when I asked about his belongings." Emery didn't move, didn't flinch, just sat back, hands still in his lap. Bernard turned to him. "Sir, we'd like to ask you to deplane so we can speak with you briefly." "Am I being removed?" Emery asked. "Just asked to step off and speak to security. It'll only take a minute." Passengers were now fully tuned in. Even folks 5 rows up were glancing over shoulders. Emery's voice stayed level. "For what reason?" "We've had a report of suspicious behavior." Emery let out a slow breath. Then he reached into the inside pocket of his jacket, pulled out a black leather ID case, and opened it with one clean motion. The flash was quick, deliberate. Gold badge, blue seal, clear lettering, Federal Bureau of Investigation. He turned it toward the officer, who stepped back half a pace to read it. "Emery D. Tillman, Senior Special Agent, Organized Crime Division." You could have heard a cough drop hit the carpet. He closed the badge and looked directly at Bernard. "I'm in the middle of returning home from a classified assignment. I boarded this flight quietly. I've done nothing to warrant removal or interrogation. So, before you go further down this road, you might want to radio TSA and confirm my credentials, or check with the Bureau. Either works." The officer looked at Bernard. Bernard didn't speak. The woman next to him? She went ghost pale. I didn't know," she stammered. "You didn't say anything. You didn't identify." "I don't have to," Emery interrupted, calm but direct. "Not unless I'm acting in official capacity, which I wasn't. I was just trying to get home." Callie returned from the front of the plane. "Captain's waiting on word. Should we hold the door?" "No," Bernard said quickly, rubbing the back of his neck. "Let's confirm and clear it." Emery looked at the officer. "You got a radio?" The officer, now clearly realizing what was unfolding, nodded. "Yes, sir. Give me 2 minutes." He stepped away toward the front. The woman in 14B opened her mouth to say something, but nothing came out. Now murmurs started to spread among the passengers, a couple of quiet chuckles. Someone whispered, "She messed with the wrong one." Emery sat quietly, his badge back in his jacket. He didn't gloat. He didn't grin. His face said what he didn't. You did this to yourself. But just because the badge was out didn't mean the damage was undone, and that was about to become painfully clear. The officer returned 2 minutes later, this time with his tone changed completely. "Agent Tillman, you're confirmed," he said quietly, almost with embarrassment. "We've also been advised to thank you for your service and let you continue your travel without further delay." Emery didn't nod, didn't thank him back, just looked down, tightened his seatbelt, and shifted to face the window again. The officer leaned toward Bernard. "You need anything else from him?" Bernard shook his head. "No, we're good." They both turned and started walking back up the aisle. Callie gave Emery a short, quiet look, somewhere between regret and apology, but didn't say anything. She turned to the woman in 14B instead. "You still want to be moved?" The woman didn't answer. Her hand clutched her tote so tightly her knuckles were nearly white. She was staring at the floor, not moving. Callie waited a second longer. "Okay then." She disappeared to the front. The silence around row 14 had weight now. People were still pretending not to look, but it was obvious they were listening. That kind of awkward attention you can feel, even when eyes aren't directly on you. Emery took off his headphones and set them in his lap. He wasn't angry, not visibly, just drained, tired in a way that doesn't come from lack of sleep. Trayvon, the student across the aisle, leaned in a little. "Man, I'm sorry you had to go through that," he said, low enough so only Emery could hear. Emery glanced over. "It's not new," he replied, "just louder today." Trayvon shook his head. "Still, it's crazy how fast they jump to conclusions. If you were wearing a hoodie and sweats like me, they probably would have brought a second cop." Emery gave a half smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Or if I'd talked back, raised my voice, shifted the wrong way." The woman next to him finally spoke. I didn't mean to offend you. He didn't turn to her. You didn't offend me. She seemed relieved until he added, You profiled me. She froze. You assumed something about me based on how I looked. Not what I did, not what I said, because I didn't say anything. You saw a black man in a quiet seat with a serious look and a black case, and your mind filled in the blanks. I just felt uncomfortable. That's not a reason to label someone dangerous, he said sharply. Your feelings don't equal facts, and your fear doesn't give you the right to drag someone through a public interrogation. A beat passed. I'm a mother, she said weakly. So am I, came a voice from behind. Everyone turned slightly. It was a woman in row 15D, early 30s, Latina, holding a baby. She'd been quiet until now, but something in her tone made people turn around. I've got a kid in my lap and a diaper bag under my seat, she said. You didn't ask me what was in my bag. Why? 'Cause I don't look suspicious? The woman in 14B blinked, stunned. The mom continued, voice calm but firm. You didn't just ask for a seat change. You made a silent accusation, and now we're all 30 minutes late because you couldn't sit beside a black man without convincing yourself he was a threat. The woman in 14B didn't speak again. Neither did most of the row, but while the seatbelt sign lit up and the engines roared to life, the real shift was happening in her face, like maybe, just maybe, the message was finally landing. Takeoff came and went with the usual tilt and rumble. Emery sat motionless, eyes closed, the drone of the engines now doing what the headphones couldn't, quieting the noise inside his head. Not the plane, not the woman next to him. The noise that always came after moments like this. He knew how it looked. A composed black man with credentials, a clean resolution, a moment of public correction, but it wasn't victory. Not to him. This kind of moment didn't go away when the wheels left the ground. The woman in 14B hadn't said another word. Her body had curled slightly inward, like she wanted to fold into herself and disappear. For all her earlier confidence, now she looked small, alone, still clinging to that tote, like it was going to save her from something. Trayvon had gone back to his music, but he kept glancing over with a look that said, I see you, man. Quiet solidarity. Respect, even. 35 minutes into the flight, the silence was broken. Agent Tillman? Emery opened his eyes. The flight attendant, Callie, was back. She held a folded piece of paper in one hand and a cup of water in the other. Captain wanted to make sure you were okay, she said. And he said to give you this. Emery took the paper. It was handwritten. We're sorry this happened on our aircraft. It shouldn't have. Thank you for your professionalism. Welcome aboard. Captain Joe Tanner. He didn't smile, but he did nod. Appreciate it, he said. Callie gave a small nod in return. Then she looked past him to 14B and hesitated. Is there anything else you need? She asked politely, but not to the woman. Emery shook his head. No, I'm good. Callie moved on. A few rows back, whispers started again. Someone said something about lawsuits. Another person muttered, public embarrassment. Emery didn't care. He didn't want anything from her. Not compensation, not an apology, not even understanding. But then, something unexpected happened. The woman spoke again. Quiet, careful, no longer defensive. I didn't know you were FBI. He looked at her finally. You shouldn't have to. She stared at him for a second. I guess I just got scared, that's all. He nodded slowly. And when you're scared, who do you think is the threat? She opened her mouth, closed it again. I'm not trying to make you feel worse than you already do, he added. But this wasn't just a mistake. It was a choice. You had a moment where you could have looked at me like a person, and you didn't. I've never done anything like this before. That doesn't mean it wasn't wrong. He let the silence sit between them. Not as punishment, just truth. You know, she said finally, people talk about this stuff on the news, and I always thought, that can't really happen like that. But I guess it does. He gave a soft shrug. Now you know. There was no anger in his voice, no sharpness, just honesty. She turned slightly in her seat, not enough to make eye contact, but enough to show she'd stopped avoiding the conversation. I'm sorry, she said very quietly. Not because you're FBI, but because I see it now. Emery didn't answer. He just looked out the window again. Sometimes silence is the only reply that matters. But the moment didn't end in that seat. It followed them down the aisle and all the way to the gate. Touchdown in St. Louis came with the usual bump and screech. As the plane rolled toward the gate, seatbelts clicked open before the light even turned off. Overhead bins popped. Passengers began their standing shuffle. Everyone stretching, checking their phones, pretending the last 2 hours hadn't been heavy. Emery stayed seated. He always did. He waited until the aisle cleared a little before he stood, grabbed his briefcase, and stepped into the slow procession toward the front. When he got to the exit row, Callie was waiting. "Hope the rest of your day's better than this flight," she said quietly. He gave her a nod. "Appreciate your professionalism." Just behind him, the woman from 14B stepped off too. Her name, he'd overheard, was Rhonda Blake. It had come up when she gave it to the supervisor. She hadn't said much since her apology, but her eyes had changed. Less icy, less tight. Outside the jet bridge, families waited with signs and hugs. Businessmen checked watches. A little girl held a teddy bear and scanned every face for the one she knew. Life resumed like nothing had happened. But Rhonda didn't walk away. She waited by the gate, shifting awkwardly on her heels, watching Emery. He walked past her, once, twice, and then paused. "You're not waiting on someone," he said. "No," she admitted. "I just didn't want to leave it like that." He turned to face her fully. His briefcase hung at his side. She spoke slowly, measuring every word now. "I've been thinking about it the whole flight. I thought if I said sorry, it would be over, but it's not. Not for me." Emery didn't say anything. She looked around, lowering her voice. "The truth is, when I sat next to you, I was uncomfortable the second I saw you, before you said a word, before you even moved. And that wasn't about you. That was about me." That got his attention. She continued, voice cracking just slightly. "I don't think of myself as racist, but I didn't need to say a slur to act on bias. I didn't need to yell or curse. I just needed to assume the worst. And I did." People passed them, not paying attention, but her eyes stayed locked on his. "I raised 2 kids," she added, "tried to teach them right, and then I acted like this, in front of people, in front of you. And I didn't even realize how easy it was for me to accuse someone I didn't know." "You said you felt unsafe," Emery replied, "but what you felt wasn't safety. It was control. You weren't afraid of what I was doing. You were afraid of what I could do based on nothing." She nodded slowly. "I deserved to be embarrassed. Maybe I needed it." He studied her for a beat, searching for any signs of performance. There were none. "And I want to do better," she said, "if that means anything." Emery finally broke the silence. "Then start with the people who look like you. Talk to them. Call it out when you see it. That's how things shift." She exhaled like she hadn't thought of that before. Then she extended her hand. He looked down at it, then back at her face, and he shook it. One firm grip, 1 second, nothing more, no cameras, no announcements, just a moment. Then he turned, walked toward the escalators, and disappeared into the crowd. But the real power of that moment wouldn't be seen at the gate. It would be felt the next time someone like Rhonda decided to speak up instead of look away. By the time Emery reached the rideshare pickup zone, the morning sun in St. Louis had turned sharp and bright, cutting through the haze of everything that had just happened. He set his briefcase down, loosened his collar, and checked his phone. A text from his wife waited at the top. "Call me when you land. Kids want to say hi." He smiled, for real this time. Not the practiced, polite smile he wore when the world was watching. A real one. The kind that comes from remembering what grounds you after a storm. Behind him, people continued their rush. Drivers honking, families reuniting, others just trying to get to baggage claim before the belt stopped. Nobody knew what had gone down on Flight 22894. Nobody could see the weight still hanging in the air. But Emery felt it. He wasn't angry. Not anymore. He was used to these moments. Too used to them. But what stuck with him this time wasn't the accusation. It wasn't the flight delay. It wasn't even flashing his badge. It was that look on Rhonda Blake's face when it hit her, when she saw herself clearly for the first time. That mattered. Because when you grow up in a country that teaches fear in subtle ways, through news cycles, school books, whispered warnings at family dinners, undoing it takes more than a diversity seminar. It takes personal reckoning. Real confrontation with the ugly truth of what you've internalized. And not everyone gets there. But Rhonda had started to. Maybe that was enough for today. A black SUV pulled up and Emery stepped in, briefcase on his lap. "Airport to Kirkwood?" the driver asked. "Yeah," Emery said. "Appreciate it." The car pulled into traffic, blending into the city, the moment already fading behind. But before it vanished completely, one thought stuck in his head. The same one that always came after moments like this. What if I wasn't FBI? No badge, no federal clearance, no title to deflect suspicion. What then? Would she have gotten her way? Would they have believed her? Would the plane have taken off without him? The truth is, a uniform shouldn't be the only thing that shields a man from someone else's fear. His dignity shouldn't depend on a gold badge. His presence shouldn't require justification. He was just trying to get home. That should have been enough. And that's what this story is really about. Not a badge, not a title, but the dangerous comfort of assumptions and the lives they quietly damage. So next time you feel that flicker of fear, that whisper of suspicion, ask yourself, did they actually do something wrong? Or did I just imagine they might? And if the answer shames you a little, sit with that. Because that discomfort, that's the beginning of change. If this story moved you, share it. If it made you think twice, talk about it. And if you've ever stayed silent while someone else was treated like a threat for existing, don't let it happen again.